Because Hockey Canada faces widespread criticism over 3 funds it uses to resolve several sexual abuse complaints outside of court, governance experts say protecting itself against uninsurable claims is actually a good job decision, but most can't afford to do so. In one case, Hockey Canada used those funds to resolve a multimillion-dollar lawsuit after a complainant claimed he was the victim of a group of sexual assaults involving world young players in 2018. CBC News informally surveyed a dozen national sports organizations, and none admitted to having similar funding. Many NSOs are in the process of transitioning their complaints processes to a process provided by the Sports Integrity Commissioner's Office and the Independent Complaints Office of Non-Abuse-Free Sports, but some still have their own internal reporting systems or use independent third parties to deal with such claims. Richard Powers, an attorney and associate professor at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, says that while there is nothing significant about the existence of these funds, good governance and a very good business decision, there are issues with transparency about how fees paid by hockey families across the country are used. That's really the critical factor here, and it's one of the things that Canadians will have to change going forward if they're going to try to regain their trust. Richard Powers, an associate professor at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, says it's good business and good governance for national sports organizations to protect themselves against uninsurable claims. Why does Hockey Canada have these funds? Former Hockey Canada officials confirmed the existence of the National Stock Fund and the Participants Heritage Trust Fund. A third fund was discovered by former Supreme Court Justice Thomas Cromwell, who was tasked with examining a controversial reserve fund used to quietly fulfill uninsured obligations, including sexual assault allegations. The interim report found that the reserve fund was necessary, but also revealed serious flaws in how it was handled. During a parliamentary hearing on July 27, Brian Cairo, Chief Financial Officer of Hockey Canada, told lawmakers that the equity fund was established in 1995 because some risks cannot be insured with commercial liability insurance. It was acknowledged that there were some unforeseen circumstances in which claims were not insured, and you might consider Graham James, Cairo said, referring to the former junior hockey coach who was convicted of sexually abusing players in the 1980s and early 1990s. Cairo said $6.8 million of the 9 claims paid from the reserve fund for a total of $7.6 million was related to the James case. Attorney Andrew Winton sits with Scott Smith, President and Chief Operating Officer of Hockey Canada, and Brian Cairo, Chief Financial Officer of Hockey Canada, during their appearance on the Canadian Heritage Standing Committee in Ottawa in July. Hockey Canada has been covered by sexual abuse insurance since 1998 and has used it to resolve 12 sexual assault claims for a total of $1.3 million. However, he did not use insurance to cover his 2018 case. The money for this settlement came from registration fees paid by hockey families in Canada and stored in these 3 funds. While there are times when premiums go up so much because of the number and size of claims, there are times when you balance that against the cost of self-insurance, Powers said, noting that doctors and lawyers sometimes pay into a self-insurance fund to cover medical or legal malpractice claims. Sport exists and does not exist. While it's good business practice, most NSO can't afford such funding. They're just trying to survive, said Eric McIntosh, a professor of sports management at the University of Ottawa. Wouldn't it be nice to have a fund to protect against these unforeseen events? Ideally, yes, says McIntosh, who conducts research on culture and high-performance sports in Canada. He is also a former junior hockey player and now coaches his own children. In practice, I think it's very difficult. Many national sports organizations in our country are underfunded. There is a shortage of personnel. Canada is a wealthy and a non-wealthy in our sports system. While it's good business practice, most NSO needs to be self-instigating against obligations. They're just trying to survive, says Eric McIntosh, a professor of sports management at the University of Ottawa. Concordia University economics professor Moshe Lander says that while he doesn't know of any other NSOs with similar funds to those of Hockey Canada, he finds it hard to believe that most sports don't exist because they carry similar risks of power imbalance between adult coaches and young athletes. It is also possible for organizations to distract the Auditor General from discovering such funds, he said. There are many ways to cover up these things, he said. It's really encouraging victims to start coming forward. I've been paid, and I'm going to break my non-disclosure agreement because that's for the greater good. Go on. Sue me. Let's see this in the light of public opinion. CBC News informally surveyed a dozen national sports groups, and none of them agreed that Hockey Canada had funds similar to the ones they used. Soccer Canada did not respond in time for publication. What do other national sports organizations say? CBC News reached out to 12 other national sports organizations to find out if they had similar funding. Soccer Canada was the only one that did not respond in time for publication, but a spokesperson said the request was in order. Athletics Canada. Athletics Canada does not have an emergency fund for obligations that cannot be insured, as part of its budget, says National Teams Communications expert Caroline Sharp. Athletics Canada, a national organization for athletics athletes, will not respond directly if it files a lawsuit outside of court, because the spectrum of what behavior constitutes abuse or harassment is so broad, from comments that could be perceived as harassment to behaviors involving grooming and sexual assault, that the process allows for an informal solution, he said. Athletics Canada is not specific to the total number of cases resolved through informal means, he said. Since 2015, complaints of violations of the organization's Code of Conduct for Preventing and Addressing Mistreatment in Sport have passed through Athletic Canada's Office of Commissioners, which Sharp says operates completely independently from Athletics Canada. As of March 31, 2023, complaints about Athletics Canada will go to OSIC. Athletics Canada has introduced new policies aimed at protecting athletes from inappropriate behavior and encouraging whistleblowers to come forward. Baseball Canada. Baseball Canada is committed to safe sport and the safety of its members and is currently moving into OSIC's non-abuse sports complaint process, media contact Adam Morissette said in an emailed response. Baseball did not respond to questions about whether Canada solved cases outside of court, whether it had an emergency fund as part of its budget to cover uninsurable liabilities, and if so, whether that fund was used to cover claims of a sexual nature, where the funds came from, or whether it had insurance to cover allegations of sexual harassment or abuse. Boxing Canada. Boxing Canada says it has not resolved a case outside of court in the past 15 years. Executive Director Roy Halpin said in an email, "We have no lawsuits or claims on file before then, which leads us to believe that no lawsuits have occurred before any of the current staff are on the spot or historically occurring." He said the organization does not currently have it and, as part of its budget, does not have an emergency fund to cover obligations that cannot be insured. According to Halpin, there is also no insurance policy that covers uninsurable liabilities, such as sexual harassment or abuse claims. Canada Basketball. Canadian basketball does not have an emergency fund for uninsurable liabilities, Matt Walker, Director of Communications and Content, who has abuse incident coverage as part of its general liability insurance policy, wrote in an email to CBC News. Canada Basketball has not been involved in uninsured liability lawsuits, he wrote. Basketball Canada is also moving into the OSIC non-abuse sports complaint and investigation process, but Walker said it will keep the independent third-party reporting process in place for matters not covered by OSIC jurisdiction. Football Canada. Football Canada does not have a special fund for debts that cannot be insured. As far as I know, there has never been a payment for allegations of a sexual nature, Executive Director Shannon Donovan wrote in an email. Due to the nature of our sport, we know that football can be considered risky due to its nature. As a result, we continue to do our due diligence to ensure we have adequate affordable insurance coverage for our members. Donovan said there may be cases where some liabilities are handled separately in a litigation or insurance claim process, but these are always managed through insurance providers. Football Canada said it had finalized its agreement with OSIC on all matters related to ill treatment, which could refer to anything from allegations of abuse to complaints about bad coaching. Gymnastics Canada. Gymnastics Canada said it had never resolved an abuse or mistreatment case outside of court, that it had never considered creating a self-insurance fund, and that CEO Ian Moss had not specifically budgeted for insurable liabilities in a series of emails. As far as he knew, he said, there has never been a payment for allegations of a sexual nature. Any lawsuit brought against Gymnastics Canada